made sense for the original Xbox to score Japanese exclusives. After all, Microsoft and Team Xbox went in guns blazing to try and secure some measure of market share in Japan, where the PlayStation 2 was selling like hotcakes. Microsoft scored some big names for its first consoles with the release of Panzer Dragoon Orta, Crazy Taxi 3, Shenmue 2, and even its very own Japan-only Mega 10 title by the name of Shin Megami Tensei 9. Despite this momentum, it could barely scratch the surface of Japanese gaming. Xbox 360 fared a little better than its predecessor with a range of exclusive shmups and RPGs for the Japanese region. And the console even succeeded in building a niche cult following thanks to the support of legendary Japanese developers like Cave and other smaller developers such as Experience. The latter went on to create a few dungeon RPGs for Xbox 360, including Student of the Round and the Stranger of Sword City series for Xbox One. This may surprise some, but the Experience developed Deathmark, which North America gamers saw a release on almost every platform besides Xbox One, was actually an Xbox One exclusive in Japan. While the developer has since moved most of their projects to Switch and PS4, they still have some sentimental attachment to the very Western Xbox platform. Why? Well, it may have to do with the support Team Xbox is willing to provide to the smaller game developer, and they feel the platform remains the best way to reach a wider Western gaming audience. Their latest title is an obscure little Xbox One project by the name of Yomi Wu Saku Hana, titled Undernauts Labyrinth of Yomi in the West after its recent Western announcement. Undernauts is a first-person dungeon RPG much like other games in the developer's catalog, where you create arbitrary characters from scratch and mostly navigate difficult dungeons where it's easy to run into a game over screen right out the gate. These games appeal to a very specific niche, and if you thought Etrian Odyssey was tough, wait till you play any Experience-developed title in this genre. There is an overarching narrative in Undernauts, but it is vaguely delivered to the player and rarely ever interrupts the grind-heavy DRPG shenanigans. There is an idea that these Japanese genres, such as shmups and dungeon RPGs, are a very acquired taste, which may also explain why the Xbox 360 became the right platform for developers like Experience and Cave to carve that niche following around their games. Not to fall into their own cookie-cutter titles, Undernauts is described by the developers as a labyrinth escape dungeon RPG, which may not sound all that different to genre veterans, but the game is likely to have its own unique sublets. Initially announced back in 2016 and after a number of delays since 2017, the game finally released on Xbox One in June 2020, and sensibly with PS4 and Switch versions to follow shortly after. Undernauts feels like a classic Mega 10 on the surface. The game is set during an alternative 70s Tokyo with a fresh modern art style that has a dark aura about it. The current incarnation looks rather neat and brooding, and anyone familiar with the art direction of the Experience games like Deathmark and Spirit Hunter NG could appreciate Undernauts' presentation. When the title was first teased in 2016, it had a completely different concept and art style altogether, with the final product sharing virtually no resemblance with the initial version. When it was first unveiled for the Xbox One in 2016, this drastically different art style, theme, and aesthetic opted for a colorful and vibrant anime style, with cute character designs set in an oriental backdrop. The final game heads to the opposite direction completely, with dark graphic novel aesthetic and a setting that takes place in a dark, gritty 1970s Japan. Rather than meeting cute anime waifus like the 2016 trailer hinted at, the final iteration of Undernauts is about underpaid members from the working class traversing through dangerous mines in a corrupt and dog-eat-dog economy, all part of an unforgiving rat race. The aesthetic and setting weren't the only things that ended up changing completely, as Undernauts was originally conceived to be an action hack-and-slash RPG, since the developers at the time wanted to branch out from their dungeon RPG comfort zone and try a different style. Early in development, however, it became clear that their ideas just weren't taking shape the way that they had hoped, and so it was back to their tried-and-true dungeon RPG mold. Sometimes games need to go back to the drawing board a few times before they reach their true potential, and that's why it's probably a good idea to not announce games so dang early. Still, there have been far worse examples of development hell in gaming history, and for what it's worth, Undernauts finally came together as a unique dungeon RPG. The game is readily available on PS4, Switch, and Xbox One in Japan, and has just been announced for a Western localization by Axis Games to release on Xbox One, PS4, Nintendo Switch, and PC. The future of developers like Experience showing loyalty and dedication to the Xbox brand remains to be seen, but it's clear the days of Japanese niche exclusives on Xbox brands are numbered. Still, the development odyssey of the game has finally come full circle, with Undernauts' English localization, along with the release of Stranger of Sapphire Wings and Stranger of Sword City Revisited. All in all, it's looking like a pretty good year for developer Experience.